The mail carrier needed a signature that morning, and the first thing my hand touched after 10 years of silence was proof my son had been telling everyone I ruined this family, while sitting on a fortune he never knew was mine. My name is Warner Dietz. I'm 61. I drove a delivery truck for a regional produce distributor out of Lubbock, and I'd spent a decade being the cautionary tale at every family gathering. My wife Lorraine married a man who once owned 40 acres of promising farmland outside town. Then a contamination order from a ruptured irrigation line locked that land under state review for 10 straight years. No selling, no building, no touching it, just property taxes and a credit score that never recovered. My son Grant turned that decade into his personal grievance. He was 22 when the freeze hit, blamed me for every missed tuition payment after, and built a career in commercial insurance, partly, I think, to prove he wasn't me. My daughter June was 17 then. She became a physical therapist, married young, divorced young, and never once brought up the land. What I stood to lose wasn't just money. It was whatever was left of being taken seriously by my own family. I should have noticed things sooner. 3 years back, Grant stopped inviting me to his firm's holiday party, said it wasn't really a +1 for parents kind of event. Lorraine started referring to my old truck route as, whatever it is you still do. At Easter, Grant's wife mentioned, almost proudly, that he'd had Lorraine sign something with their family attorney, just to keep things clean, and nobody explained further. I filed that detail away, without knowing why. Then, in March, a woman from a title company called our house, asking to confirm details on a parcel out past Route 9, my parcel, and I hadn't authorized any inquiry. I wrote the date and her name on a notepad by the phone. Old habit. It mattered more than I knew. The cough started in April. I blamed the warehouse dust. By June, I was coughing up streaks I didn't want to look at too closely, so I finally went in. The doctor didn't dance around it. A mass, operable, but it needed to come out within weeks. Then billing told me my coverage had a gap on that specific procedure. $4,200, due before they'd book the operating room. I sat in my truck in that parking lot and did the math 6 different ways. It came out the same every time. I didn't have it. My credit was still wrecked from the land freeze, and no bank in the county would touch me. I told myself I wouldn't call Grant. I lasted 2 days. He picked up with restaurant noise behind him, celebrating a new account. I told him everything. The mass, the surgery, the number. There was a pause long enough that I let myself hope. Then his voice went flat. I spent years digging myself out of the hole your bad decisions put us in, he said. Ask the hospital for a payment plan. He hung up before I could answer. Lorraine was worse. When I called her, she told me not to embarrass Grant, that he'd worked hard to get away from all this. She said June had a stable job, didn't she? She called our daughter Emma. She'd been doing that for years, whenever she was too angry to think straight. June found out because I couldn't hide it from her over diner coffee 2 days later. She didn't say a word about the money. She reached into her bag, set an envelope of cash on the table, and turned her phone around to show me a payday loan approval for $2,000. She'd sold her car that morning. Cars can be replaced, she said, gripping my hand. You can't. I wept in that diner booth in front of half the lunch crowd. My daughter, the one nobody bragged about on the phone, was the only one who ever actually saw me. The surgery happened in early August. I recovered on June's pull-out couch because my own house felt too empty and too quiet. She taped her new bus schedule to the fridge, because the car was gone, and every morning I watched her leave for work smelling like dry erase markers, never once mentioning the loan or the car, or when I'd pay her back. Grant leased a new Audi that same month to celebrate his bonus. 16 days after surgery, a certified letter arrived. State Land Use Authority. Remediation status complete. Site released from oversight effective the previous month. 10 years. Done. In 4 lines of type. I read it 3 times before I trusted it. A second letter followed 2 days later from a logistics park developer. The interchange expansion everyone said was years off had finally broken ground half a mile from my property line. Their offer was real, signed, with numbers behind it. $9,400,000. 30-day close. I sat very still at June's kitchen table. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been crying over $4,000. Now I was holding an offer for over $9 million. And my eyes kept landing on that bus schedule taped to the fridge in June's handwriting. I didn't call Lorraine. I didn't call Grant. They'd already told me, in their own words, whose problem I was. I called Dale Whitcomb instead, the attorney who'd handled what little business I had left after the freeze, one of the only people who'd stuck by me. I told him everything. Then I asked him to pull something else first. A partition agreement Lorraine had signed 5 years earlier, one Grant had pushed for, to protect her credit from my debt. Dale read it back to me line by line. Lorraine had waived, released, and forever discharged any claim, present or future, to that property or its proceeds, regardless of cause. She hadn't just protected herself from my failure. She'd signed away any right to whatever came next, good or bad, and Grant had witnessed it himself. I told Dale to move on the sale quietly, and to set up an irrevocable trust in June's name for the full amount once my debts cleared. Every dollar. He didn't argue. 8 days later, Grant and Lorraine showed up pounding on June's door. They didn't know about the sale yet. Grant was drowning in something of his own, a client dispute, I'd learn later, and needed money badly enough to walk into the one place he'd sworn he'd never set foot in again. June opened the door with her arms crossed. Grant pushed past her, without a word about my surgery, without asking how I was healing. "Dad, we need to talk," he said, voice tight. Turned out he'd checked the county registry that afternoon, out of habit, and found the deed transfer. $9.4 million, closed 9 days earlier. "You hid this from us," he said, "your own son." "Last time I called you," I said, "you told me to ask the hospital for a payment plan while you were out celebrating. I didn't feel obligated to call you the second something good happened either." Lorraine's face had gone pale. Grant kept pushing, said she'd driven an old Camry for years while I sat on a fortune, said I was punishing them, said his lawyer was already drafting a motion to freeze the accounts and file for divorce on grounds of financial abandonment. "That's fraud, Dad," he said, "hiding marital assets." I stood up slowly and pulled 2 folded documents from my jacket. I slid the first to Lorraine. "You remember signing this?" I said. She looked down, and the color left her face before she finished the first paragraph. I reminded her what it said, what Grant himself had called smart at the time. She hadn't just protected her credit, she'd converted that land into my sole separate property and waived every future claim to it, regardless of cause, on Grant's advice, with Grant's signature as witness. Then I slid the second document to Grant. June's bank statement. $11. "That's what was in your sister's account while you were ordering top-shelf scotch," I said, "because she sold her car and took out a high-interest loan so I could get on an operating table." Nobody spoke. The window unit hummed. I told them the trust was already final, irrevocable, the entire amount going to June, that I hadn't hidden the money to be cruel, only to be certain it landed with the one person who'd actually earned it. "You two divorced yourselves from this family years ago," I said. "You just hadn't filed the paperwork yet." They left without another word, no slamming door, nothing, just 2 people realizing in real time that the clever legal move Grant had once been so proud of was the exact thing that had locked them both out. Within weeks, June's loan was paid off, her rent covered, a modest fund started for the tutoring program she'd always wanted to run. A car waited for her that she fussed at me for buying. Grant's firm quietly parted ways with him that fall, and I heard, secondhand, that there was no one left in his corner willing to bail him out of what came next. June stood in that kitchen doorway after they'd gone, and asked why I'd given her all of it. I told her some things aren't about splitting fair. Fair had already happened, at a diner off Route 9, weeks earlier, and only one of my children had shown up for it. If you'd been sitting in that hospital parking lot doing the math I did, would you have kept calling family members hoping one would answer differently, or would you have stopped after the first hang-up the way I eventually did?